Hey, my name is Ren Ben Canaan, and I'm going to read you On the Road now. So enjoy. On the Road, the original scroll, the legendary first draft, rougher, wilder, and racier than the 1957 edition, by Jack Kerouac. Dedicated to the memory of Neal Cassady and Allen Ginsberg. Camarado, I give you my hand. I give you my love more precious than money. I give you myself before preaching or law. Will you give me yourself? Will you come travel with me? Shall we stick to each other as long as we live? Walt Whitman. On the Road, the original scroll. I first met Neal not long ago after my father died. I had just gotten over a serious illness that I won't bother to talk about, except that it really had something to do with my father's death and my awful feeling that everything was dead. With the coming of Neal, there really began for me that part of my life that you could call my life on the road. Prior to that, I'd always dreamed of going west, seeing the country, always vaguely planning and never specifically taking off and so on. Neal is the perfect guy for the road because he actually was born on the road. When his parents were passing through Salt Lake City in 1926 in a jalopy on their way to LA. First reports of Neal came to me through Hal Chase, who'd shown me a few letters from him written in a Colorado reform school. I was tremendously interested in these letters because they so naively and sweetly asked for Hal to teach him all about Nietzsche and all the wonderful intellectual things that Hal was so justly famous for. At one point, Allen Ginsberg and I talked about these letters and wondered if we would ever meet the strange Neal Cassady. This is all far back, when Neal was not the way he is today, when he was a young jail kid shrouded in a mystery. Then news came that Neal was out of reform school, and he was coming to New York for the first time. Also, there was talk that he had just married a 16-year-old girl named Luann. One day I was hanging around the Columbia campus. Hal and Eddie told me Neal had just arrived and was living in a guy called Bob Malkin's cold water pad in East Harlem, the Spanish Harlem. Neal had arrived the night before, the first time in New York, with his beautiful little sharp chick Luann. They got off the Greyhound bus at 50th Street and cut around the corner looking for a place to eat and went right into Hector's. And since then, Hector's cafeteria has always been a big symbol of New York for Neal. They spent money on big, beautiful, glazed cakes and cream puffs. All this time, Neal was telling Luann things like, "Now, darling, here, we're in New York. And although I haven't quite told you everything that I was thinking when we crossed the Missouri, and especially at the point when we passed the Bonneville Reformatory, which reminded me of my jail problem, it's absolutely necessary now to postpone those leftover things concerning our personal love things and at once begin thinking of specific work-life plans." And so on in the way that he had in his early days. I went to the cold water flat with the boys and Neal came to the door in his shorts. Luann was jumping quickly from the bed. Apparently he was fucking with her. He always was doing so. This other guy who owned the place, Bob Malkin, was there, but Neal had apparently dispatched him to the kitchen, probably to make some coffee while he proceeded with his love problems. For to him, sex was the one and only important thing in life. And although he had to sweat and curse to make a living and so on, my first impression of Neal was like a young Gene Autry. Trim, thin-hipped, blue eyes, and a real Oklahoma accent. In fact, he'd just been working on a ranch, Ed Ulls in Sterling, Colorado, before marrying at Luann and coming east. Luann was a pretty sweet thing, but awfully dumb and capable of doing horrible things. And she proved a while later. I only mention this first meeting of Neal because of what he did. That night we all drank beer and I got drunk and blah, blah, blah somewhat, slept under the couch, and in the morning, while we sat around dumbly smoking butts from ashtrays in the gray light of a gloomy day, Neal got up nervously, paced around and thinking, decided the thing to do was to have Luann make breakfast and sweep the floor. Then I went away. This was all I knew of Neal at the outset. During the following week, he confided in Hal Chase that he absolutely had to learn how to write from him. Hal said I was a writer, and he should come to me for advice. Meanwhile, Neil had gotten a job in the parking lot, had a fight with Luann in their Hoboken apartment. God knows why they went there. And she was so mad and so vindictive down deep that she reported him to the police. Some false, trumped up, hysterical, crazy charge, and Neil had to lamb from Hoboken. So he had no place to live. Neil came right out to Ozone Park, where I was living with my mother. And one night, while I was working on my book or my painting or whatever you want to call it, there was a knock on the door. And there was Neil bowing, shuffling obsequiously in the dark of the hall, saying, "Hello, you remember me? Neil Cassidy? I've come to ask you to show me how to write." "And where's Luann?" I asked. And Neil said she'd apparently hoarded a few dollars together or something of that nature and gone back to Denver. The whore! So we went out to have a few beers because we couldn't talk like we wanted to in front of my mother, who sat in the living room reading her paper. She took one look at Neil and decided from the very beginning that he was a madman. She never dreamed she too would be driving across the mad American night with him once more. In the bar, I told Neil, "For Christ's sakes, man, I know very well you didn't come to me only to want to become a writer. And after all, what do I really know about it? Except you got to stick to it with the energy of a Benny addict." And he said, "Yes, of course, I know exactly what you mean. And in fact, those problems have occurred to me. But the thing that I want is the realization of those factors that should one depend on Schopenhauer's dichotomy for an inwardly realized, etc., and on and in that way. Things I understood not a bit, and he himself didn't. And what I mean about it is, in those days, he really didn't know what he was talking about. That is to say, he was a young jail kid, all hung up on the wonderful possibilities of becoming a real intellectual. And he liked to talk in the tone and using the words, but in a jumbled way that he had heard real intellectuals talk. Although, mind you, he wasn't so naive that in all other things,